life is suffering. Right. Indisputable. Mephistopheles says, well, look at the world. I mean, you look around the world, it's nothing but a bloodbath. It's just suffering everywhere. Everything eats everything, and people die terribly, and they're cruel to one another, and the whole mess is nothing but a constant haul of terrible carnage and ruin and wreck. He says it'd be better if it was never existed at all. And that's a very, very interesting idea. And I do believe, and I've seen this in people many times, that in the depths of despair, especially when you've been betrayed, for example, and you wander into the wrong subdivision of the underworld, that's something that comes to mind. If you have a very sick child, for example, or maybe your whole family is suffering, as whole families do sometimes, an idea is going to come to you. It's like, good God, who put this mess together? And is it really worth it? Is it really worth the suffering? Suicidal people, they say no. They say, no, enough of this. And you have to be pushed a long way, generally speaking, before you'll actually commit suicide. You have to be in very, very desperate straits. But your answer under those conditions is that being is such that it would be better if it had never been. So anyways, but in this, God says that it was good. And I've thought about that a lot. It's like, because the question is something like, well, is something better than nothing? Because that's a really good question, No matter how, it doesn't matter how perfect the environment is set up, something that doesn't fit is going to make its way inside. It's one of the oldest stories of mankind. And you see, the thing that makes itself manifest inside in the Genesis story is a snake. Now that snake turns out to be Satan, which is like, how the hell does that happen? It's a snake. Like, where does that come from? It's not actually in the biblical writings to any degree. It's part of the surrounding mythology. Well, it's partly because people started to figure out that the worst snake wasn't a snake. The worst snake was the snake that was inside a person. Because a malevolent person is way more of a threat than just a snake. Like a snake wants to bite you and it wants to eat you and all of that. And they were hell on our extremely primordial ancestors. But the human race has been trying to figure out where the threat is forever. Well, first of all, it was external, right? It was all external. It was the snake, it was the barbarian. But then it got localized to some degree inside the individual. It's like, that's a bad person. That person has a snake in them. And then the idea kind of came out, this is so cool, the idea is that, well, the snake that's inside bad person A and the snake that's inside bad person B is somehow the same. So that's where the idea of an articulated morality starts to come from, is there's an equivalence of evil across individuals. So then the idea of evil itself starts to become abstracted at the same time that the idea of good does. Well, evil gets associated with Satan, and Satan gets associated with the snake. It's mind-boggling. I mean, these are how these, see, we were chimps, for Christ's sake. So in the Garden of Eden, there's Adam and Eve, right, the primordial human beings, and there's a walled garden. That's paradise. Paradise means walled garden, and Eden means well-watered place. And so there's this idea that the proper habitat of human beings is an amalgam of social structure and nature. And that's exactly right, because that's what we live in, right? We never live in nature. And we never live in society. We live in an amalgam of society and nature. That's the human environment, so it's a walled garden. A better conceptualization of predator might be, where does it come from? Let's say it's a snake. Well, there's a lair of snakes somewhere. And so if we want to get rid of the snake, we shouldn't be conceptualizing it as a snake. We should be conceptualizing it as one manifestation of a lair of snakes, and what we should do is go down, follow the damn snake wherever it goes, and find its lair and wipe out all of the snakes. And that's a more abstract representation, right? It's not predator anymore. It's the source of predation. And so if you want to solve the predator problem permanently, you don't kill the snake. You get rid of all the snakes. But then you might think, okay, well, the worst predator is the lair of snakes, right? But then you might think, well, wait a minute. The worst predator isn't the lair of snakes. Maybe the worst predator is the enemies that come to attack us. And those are human enemies. That evil can manifest itself inside. So there's criminals inside the city. And there's people who want to bring you down. And there's malevolence within the city, not only outside. So then there's the problem of the snake that's closer to you. And then there's the ultimate problem, which is the snake that lives in your heart. right? And that's each individual's capacity for evil. And then that was conceptualized as a transcendent spirit, right? So that's the spirit of Satan, who's, if you're a mother, and if you're a mother who's worth her salt, you offer your son to be destroyed by the world. That's what you do. I mean, that's what's going to happen, right? He's going to be born, he's going to suffer, he's going to have his trouble in life, he's going to have his illnesses, he's going to face his failures and catastrophes, and he's going to die. That's what's going to happen. This is also, I think, why it's so useful to contemplate your mortality, so to speak, is you're screwed no matter what you do. You know, and that actually frees you, is that you have path A that has catastrophes, and you have path B that has catastrophes, and you don't get to have the no catastrophe path, but you get to pick which one. Ivan tells the story about, that Dostoevsky took from the newspapers, about this family, mother and father, who they were angry at their 4-year-old daughter, and they locked her in an outhouse overnight, and she was screaming out there, and she froze to death. You know, it was news in Moscow. And Ivan basically says to Alyosha, it's like, you know, who's making a case for the goodness of being, or the goodness of God, depending on how you want to look at it. And Ivan says, how the hell can you bother, how can you even dare to make an argument like that? It's like, this is the sort of thing that happens in the world all the time. And then he asks Alyosha, look, would you be willing voluntarily to torture that girl to death to ensure that things would continue? And Alyosha says, well, no, I wouldn't do it. And Ivan says, well, I know you wouldn't do it. So it's like, what's your conclusion about that? Being shouldn't exist. And then Goethe asks the same question in Faust. He has a character named Mephistopheles. And Mephistopheles is, he's kind of the intellectual angle of Satan. That's one way of thinking about it. And he says the same thing. He's talking about his motivations. He says, well, what motivates the great adversary of mankind? And Mephistopheles says it's straightforward. Being is so terrible that it should be eradicated. Okay, fair enough. Strong argument. The only logical conclusion that you can draw from that is that life is so terrible that it shouldn't exist.